la nueva industria musical. Augusto Perera. Augusto Perera, PA, Estados Unidos. Federico Fischer. Fischer Abogados, Uruguay. Mónica Zuluaga, Hemisferio Derecho, Colombia. Moderadora, María Soledad Álvarez, Alvarez y Asociados, Argentina.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be the moderator of this panel on the musical industry. As you know, last year in March 2020, when we were hit by the pandemic, everything that was in person was suspended, and we know that live presentations for music have a great impact, which has clearly changed a lot for the industry, and I think that is worth analyzing. The fact that streaming became more consolidated meant that we have new players in the industry of music, and digital platforms have modified the scenario as we knew it. So the question is, in this context, are all players able to perform at their best? Have any rules changed regarding maybe management or efficiency in terms of revenue? So we will be talking about this today with our three panelists. We have Mónica Zuluaga. She defines herself as an art lawyer. She is an artist and a lawyer. She specializes in intellectual property and entertainment rights. She's a singer, songwriter. Her artistic name is María. She has produced her 3 albums, and her experience has been focused mainly on working with artists, while she also have a cultural insight on the topic. She is a co-creator of the podcast called Dr. Rot. So, Mónica, the floor is yours. Thank you, Soledad. Thank you for your presentation. I'd also like to thank my fellow panel speakers, Augusto, Federico. It's a true pleasure to be here with you today, and having had the conversations that we had beforehand, talking about this, which we are so passionate about and that we dedicate so much time on our daily lives. I'm going to talk to you today about that context of stakeholders of the industry, as Soledad said before. Some of them have arrived, some have stayed, some have been transformed, and some of them have left. And so today we will talk about the context and which are the stakeholders, or as we will call them in this presentation, these players in a business that, needless to say, is evolving really fast. We've seen this, and we know since the beginning of the industry of music that everything has been a milestone, especially related to the way in which users have access to music. And therefore, stakeholders and players and the rules have changed. Music before could only be listened to as long as you had someone that could play it live for you. There was no other way for you to have access to music. After that, we had some places where live music was played, and that was the way in which people got to know music. And it was because of the phonograph that we could record this music so that we could listen to it later on demand. Of course, this created a huge industry related to discography. These were the golden years for the music industry that was transformed, did not end, but it was transformed with the digital music, which then included music downloads, but nowadays is all about live streaming and streaming of music as we listen to it, most of us at least do. So this movement and these changes have created a number of new stakeholders, and I would like to focus on these three aspects that I'm mentioning here. This industry and these stakeholders appear as an object of the right to the music of industry. In this industry, we talk about three objects of right. One that is related to the piece, the creation, which is original, which was made by an author, that is the combination of sounds and melody and lyrics in the case of songs. And that is that initial right that authors have to use when it comes to their work. But also we have what we call phonogram, which is the recording of such piece, something that you can listen to permanently because it's fixated, it's recorded in whatever way you choose, and that allows us to have a recording. And that recording refers to a new right, and it's a new object of rights, because we have a third object that is related to interpretation and execution, which is the participation that an interpreter or a singer or a musician has So just in these very first points, we already mix different objects, different scenarios that sometimes overlap, but that make this issue of right management something very, very entertaining and interesting. But the object is not the only thing that we need to take into account when we analyze the scenario and the stakeholders. We also need to think about the users of right. We have some patrimonial rights that have been predefined, and these relates to some users that the author needs to authorize, related to the phonogram and the interpretation or the execution. And we have some derivations from these patrimonial rights when we talk about, for example, digital environments, and we talk about disposition or synchronization, which is a combination of a number of rights. All of this implies, of course, new scenarios and new stakeholders or players. And that is why this combination does not represent the possibility of talking about three models. We have three main models, which is one related to live music, another one related to phono-recorded music, and a third one, which is called music for other users, which we could say combines phonographed music, phono-recorded music, and live music with copyright. So maybe we can start there. Let's talk about the schemes of stakeholders in each of these scenarios. So first of all, when we talk about live music, you will see that in these three scenarios, we have, first of all, the author, because music is born with its creation. And even though the artist does have a role of interpreting and executing that piece, it is the author that holds the main right and the main asset. And many times what happens is that you can have a songwriter who is also a singer or performer, but otherwise we can have two different people. And that artist may have, this is not always the case, but may have a manager. And a manager is a person that is a company or a person that will direct the project, that determine when the launching is going to happen, if they're going to collaborate with someone else, where the artist should play. And depending on the case, the manager should also deal with some administrative issues, booking issues, concerts, and will operate with a number of different issues. As Soledad said, we've had a number of contracts that have existed for quite a long time. We have a manager in which they work for a fee plus down payment for a percentage of maybe the turnover. Sometimes it's just a fee, sometimes it's just a percentage of the turnover, and sometimes you also have work with royalties. And we also have booking agents, which are the ones that work with producers or people that organize events so that an artist can play and they can get paid for that work that they are doing. And this gets finally to an audience, which is sometimes people who pay for a ticket. And we could include as part of this value a payment for some collective management associations, which the person that is organizing the event or the author has to pay for. We're talking about entities that collect some of the copyrights associated to this, but Augusto will be telling us a bit more about that in further detail. I believe for now it's important to say that these are entities in which in some countries they have to pay for public communication. And for this to happen, the author needs to be affiliated to the management entity. This is I talk a lot about this because sometimes I get some authors and, they tell me, but my song is always played and I don't get any money from that. And of course, I tell them that they need to be associated to these groups, to these associations. And this way, these royalties are paid to the author. And this is exactly the point of birth of this right in this scenario. But in the new stakeholders in the industry of music, we also have platforms, streaming platforms, live streaming platforms, or digital platforms that Federico will be talking to us about. And I believe this is worth mentioning because it transforms the scenario in which live music is going to be played, and therefore the conditions related to licenses and payments and audiences. And finally, the money that the author will get because as a result of those concerts that are live streamed. We also have the musical editor, who is not a new stakeholder, is a traditional figure in the industry of music, but that person, what it does is it administers the catalog of the author and their pieces. But in this public communication scenario, they did not really appear in this scheme because they just didn't. But nowadays, in most of collective management associations, you don't pay the full price to the author, but a price is put aside for the publisher. And if an author does not have a publisher or a musical editor, they will need to find someone to do that for them, because otherwise they will not be paid for that money. And that is the person that we call the editorial right manager. And this is the person that works with these collective associations. That is the case of Sound Trust, for example, which is one of the best known cases. And then we have associations that, like Latin Author, for example, that relates to the payment of licenses on digital environments. And this is another element that I think is worth mentioning, which is in terms of authorship, we know that the copyright of the author is something that will always exist, but those rights, those patrimonial rights that imply the transaction, may be granted to somebody else in full or in part. And nowadays, it is quite common to negotiate that publishing right. So we have documents that are like split sheets of royalties that have a number of authors that are actually not authors. They happen to be the manager that is negotiating a part of this publishing rights and needs to be associated with a collective management association. Again, this is just to get us thinking about the new stakeholders that we have in the industry that at the beginning do not have the condition or quality of being an author, but they nonetheless have royalties for that. Now we have a second context, which is phono-recorded music. And here we're talking about, again, the author, because we have a musical piece. We have an editor who I insist is the person that's going to manage the pieces of the author. We have an artist that will be the one that will record the piece, whether or not that piece was written and composed by them. But well, an independent artist is what I said, is an independent producer, is a composer, is someone that works with the associations, is a phonographic producer, which is something that we will see now on.
So in this category of phono-recorded music, I think it's very important to highlight that role of the producer, who is the person, the juridical person, who is in charge of directing and paying for the production. So paying for the recording and the master, to pay for that product that will be fixed. And is therefore the owner of those rights of that phonogram. And that phonograph author can be, for example, Seal, or it can be like an indie one, who has another type of relationship with the artist. Sometimes maybe I want my child to be an artist, so maybe I pay for that, and maybe I am the producer, but I really have no knowledge of the music industry. I'm talking about this because I have a lot of clients with those characteristics. So they're supporting their children with their dream, but they have no idea about any of these rights. So we have those kinds of labels, so also like indie labels and stuff. And we have also, for example, companies that manufacture CDs and vinyls. Now they don't have as much production. Vinyls are now stronger again because of the romantic experience of listening to an LP, but it's not really the most normal thing. And they get maybe to a record shop or a distributor to get to the final consumer. But that is regarding reproduction rights. But what happens in terms of the recorded music, the phono recorded music? So we get to the media, the spread media, and they need to have this license that we've been talking about to reach a final consumer. So this license, again, is granted by collective societies, managing societies, that in this case, it's also important to mention that they are not only getting the royalty of the author, but also the royalty for the phonographic producer, for the master, and the artist or the interpreter, whose participation is also in that phonogram. And here, I would also like to mention again, I'm showing the arrows there to see what comes in and out in terms of rights and payments. But here we have, again, other stakeholders who are very important for the current music industry. So we have digital platforms, video platforms, that need a digital aggregator for the music of the author, of a phonographic producer, to be able to be played there. So there we have a new intermediary, sometimes two, because sometimes we don't have just the artist on its own. We need a label that also negotiates the percentages and the conditions. So this is also a very important stakeholder for the music industry in these times. And they also talk about payments in these collective societies for publishing and also for the master. We have other participants in the royalties in the master, because I think that there's also cases in which there's not only a split of the publishing, but also of master. We have the producer, the sound engineer, the people who provide the money. So that is split among a lot of people. Then that's not wrong, but in practice, it's a bit more complex, and that's why it's also important to mention it. I'm sorry, I spoke a lot, and so I needed a little break. So there are new stakeholders here. Again, we have administrators of editorial rights and also collection entities, which are not necessarily the collective societies. So, for example, the subject change for artists and interpreters. Here we also have an important role of media monitoring, which also always existed. Before, they were always listening to the pieces. Now it's more systematized, it's more effective, and I'm also mentioning there that because of that. And in the last scenario, we have music for other uses. And there we have transformation rights, for example, and synchronization rights, in which case we would need to ask for permission to the author and the editor, the producer, in terms, depending on what use we're going to make of it. And some of these people would get the license. So brands or audiovisual producers, phonographic producers, people who need those rights, and that will pay them in a direct way to the owners of the rights. And we don't have the participation there of the societies of collective management. Okay. So having a final audience that receives this content, and having these stakeholders of the vast industry, we have also the administrators of these rights, the ones that split the royalties, and other stakeholders that we hadn't seen before. So finishing with that, I would like to finish with this first intervention by showing these final comments and conclusions. There are other stakeholders, which are, for example, providers, but that appear with possibilities of participation in the royalties, and I think therefore that it's important to mention them. So there we have labels, the sound engineer, publicists, lawyers, and even the expert in digital marketing. It's also important in this new modality of the music industry, the role of the fan or the follower, because in this industry now we have really a way to get to the fans, and there is a closer relationship there that has changed the dynamics. Nowadays, artists can even can have fans who pay percentages of the rights in their pieces. There are some apps that have that, some applications that have that, and where fans have a feeling that they participate in the royalties. Another important thing is we have informed artists nowadays that are asking for transparency, for effectiveness, and they're asking for the industry to be clearer in terms of numbers, in terms of figures. And I would like to close up with this phrase that it says that the digital future of the music industry is a fact, but it doesn't necessarily mean a better market for the content creators. This is very clear. It's clear that we are facing really big transformations, that the digital future is being assumed and that we will have to assume whatever comes our way. But there are a lot of possibilities that will provide benefits for the creator, and we have to work for that. We have to strive for that, but that's not necessarily what's naturally going to happen. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Monica. That was a great presentation, very clear. Even though it's a complex industry, we're going to have now our second panelist, Dr. Federico Fischer. He's a lawyer, graduated from the Law University of the University of Montevideo. He has a master's in intellectual property of the George Washington University of Law. And he's been part of Fischer Lawyers for a long time, and he works in the entertainment industry. He's a professor of administrative law in the University of Montevideo, and he's going to tell us about the phenomenon of concerts and shows in digital world and their impact in terms of intellectual property. So, Federico. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Soledad for the presentation, also Monica and Augusto. It's been a pleasure to prepare and share this panel with you. I would also like to thank the Executive Committee of ACP for the invitation, and I would really like to thank Federico for the invitation and for his trust. So after this general panorama that we saw with Monica, and this new vision that we have of this new music industry, today's talk is focused on a phenomenon in particular, that is concerts and shows in the digital world. What are the challenges, opportunities, and questions for the music industry that are presented by this new phenomenon? As you know, and as Soledad said, we have a phenomenon that is not new, but that really exploded. It had a burst with the pandemic of COVID-19. Why? Because physical venues were, of course, restricted for concerts. It's not possible anymore to have live concerts. And for many artists, that's their main source of income and their main activity as artists. And that generated for artists to have to go to the digital world, whether as a source of income or also as a way to be present with their audience, to share with them, to provide entertainment during a circumstance that is the one that we have today with a pandemic that is very complicated, and where the value of entertainment and the possibility of having access to culture is also very important for the health of people. Here in the slide, you can see some figures of this phenomenon. For example, the live streaming of live concerts has an estimate of $600 million in income in 2020. For example, in one platform called Dancing Town, it was estimated that between March of 2020 and December of 2020, there were more than 60,000 live streams by 20,000 artists. There were also mega productions, for example, the show done by the K-pop band BTS, which had in just one show $20 million of income, which is much more than the biggest bands really get in a live concert. And also, as to measure this phenomenon, for example, Twitch, which is one of the main, if not the main, live streaming platform today in terms of video games, had an increase of 550% in live streamings and views of the live streamings in the music category. It really is a phenomenon that has really increased exponentially with the pandemic. Now we have many different kinds of shows and concerts that have been developing since the start of the pandemic until now. We have live streamings on the one hand, which are spontaneous concerts, live concerts, where the artist is not with the audience, is somewhere else, and they are broadcasted through the internet with live streaming technology. And we've had, for example, spontaneous concerts in the social media, for example, Facebook, Instagram. And also we've had big productions, festivals, which change from a physical format to an online format. We also have phenomenons of recorded shows, what we could say false live concerts, where the artist or artists record their show first, and then that show is broadcasted through a streaming platform at a certain time, for example. And then we've had shows in what I would call non-traditional media, which have a really big potential. For example, concerts within video games, and then other experiences of virtual reality that are live. Here I want to talk about two in particular. The first is the virtual concert using the Wave platform that was given by John Legend last year. Wave is a startup of technology that allows, through technology, for the artists to provide a show in a studio. They wear a suit and creates an avatar of themselves. And that avatar is in a virtual world, in an online world, where they are singing in front of a certain audience that can access through virtual reality or other media on a stage that is completely digital. So if you have a chance, take a look at the videos, because it's really incredible how technology allows what it allows. And another example of a concert in a video game is the one that the United States DJ Marshmello had in the Fortnite video game in 2019 in this case, but it was the first concert ever done in a video game, in this video game Fortnite. And for you to take into account the breadth of what we're talking about, there were 10.7 million players connected to this game who were viewing the concert at the time.
Este fenómeno no se explica o
This phenomenon, I believe, could not have taken off the way that it did if we don't consider streaming technology that supports it. And related to streaming, as far as this talk is concerned, I'd like to mention that, first of all, it allows us to convey content online in real time. But unlike other types of communication, it does not require you to download the content for it to be seen, or at least not thoroughly. You don't need to download it for you to see it. This technology in its live modality has allowed for this boom of shows in the digital world that naturally have an impact from the copyright point of view that we need to analyze. Luckily, Monica has already given us a great overview regarding the rights and the acts involved in this kind of modality. I'd briefly like to mention that we will have author copyrights on lyrics and music, which may or may not be different authors, and then connected rights such as artists, interpreters, the executor, and the rights of the phonographic producer. Regarding those rights, streaming and live streaming digital concerts also imply that we will have some acts, such as, for example, public communication. We can have fixation or reproduction, synchronization, also availability. So we will see each act and each right depending on the case, which could apply, which is not the same, for example, in the case of a live streaming that does not have that does not stay posted for anyone to watch it later, than if you're talking about, for example, a recording, such as a show that is broadcast live on YouTube, and then that stays there and it can be seen on the platform later on. Naturally, all of this has an impact on the rights involved in the business model, and we will be talking about that today precisely. Well, this is something that I like to call a radiography, an X-ray of a live stream. We have an artist on the side who, by using a given platform, which could be Instagram Live or any other live streaming platform available, will communicate a certain musical composition, its execution, its interpretation to an audience, to the public. Regarding the acts involved, in my opinion, there's no doubt that we have an act of public communication in which the artist, through technology and through the platform, will allow a number of people to have access to their work without them having to have access to a physical recording. Then maybe we could analyze, we could further delve into what modality of public execution we talking about when we talk about a live stream. I'm sorry, what kind of public communication modality? If we're talking about a public execution that is done by playing, for example, an instrument, if it is a private execution, in which maybe the artist is playing an instrument at home or playing at home with no public audience, Or we could also be in a scenario in which we're talking about making something available to the public. I believe that this modality of live streaming in which this is happening at a given time would not really qualify as public availability, because it does not necessarily need to be, or it may not be accessed whenever people want. Another point to be considered is whether or not we have a reproduction or a fixation act when we are live streaming. In my view, and this may depend on the technological details of the technology that is being used in the live streaming, but if we have reproduction, then we could qualify it as something that is temporary reproductions, temporary plays, so that we can make this live streaming available, such as uploading the content to the server in the platform for it to be broadcast, or maybe the fact that the people can see it by using the live streaming technology itself. So the data are sent by packages, in packages, and that are uploaded and get to people's devices, and then they are deleted. So we can say that we're not talking about permanent reproduction, but it's all temporary. And then we could further analyze what happens in the case of whether or not this live streamed piece, for example, is fixated. If you can have access to a record of this, then of course you're talking about different kinds of rights. If there is public communication, you need to talk about licenses. A license that will most likely be obtained through a collective management association, and we need to consider whether or not we already have in the platform that we're using for live streaming a sort of license that is pre-agreed in the case. Following up on this idea of an X-ray, we can talk, for example, about a DJ that is making a live presentation at a party or live streaming using a platform. Here, on top of copyrights and every right attached and linked to it, we're talking about phonogram rights that are being communicated to the public through the execution of the DJ, through the work of the DJ. And we could also be talking about some rights that are pertaining to the DJ themselves. On top of the license for public communication on the pieces that are being communicated, we need to take into account all the attached rights to the phonogram in the case, and all the artists and interpreters, and we need to assess whether or not we need to get a clearance or maybe the payment for some royalties, depending on how we're going to use these phonograms. Here's another example. This is probably the 2.0 version of Moniker for live music. This is basically a live show of an artist, but for an online festival that is being live streamed. We can see that on top of the traditional stakeholders, we also have a streaming platform as a stakeholder in itself that is of vital importance to make the live streaming of the show possible. In many cases nowadays, because of the boom and the number of digital shows, we've had new players in the world of live streaming. We have platforms that are specific to the music industry, and also companies that used to sell tickets in the in-person physical world, and now they have reinvented themselves, and they also offer streaming services for the digital world, such as the case of LivePlay, which is a company that launched an app that is specific for this. Here we have a picture that shows Jorge Drexler, Uruguayan songwriter and singer. He was recording this last year, and at the same time, he is in constant contact with the public, probably through social media, which shows the interaction, the new ways in which authors and musicians can interact with an audience, which probably wouldn't be possible if the show had been a live in-person show. So I think it's important to ask ourselves, what are the new challenges and what are the new questions that arise from these new from this new scenario in the music industry? Of course, we have new players, new platforms, and also some new roles for some already existing players, like the case that I have just mentioned, or maybe even bookers who had a role in the physical world, which, on top of working on the agreements for different shows, they could maybe get the plane tickets for an artist to get to a concert, which of course will not be something that they'll be doing today, which means that they need to reconvert what they do. There are new ways to monetize things. Monica was already talking about the possibility given by digital concerts of monetizing a concert on top of the fee that you have to pay to watch it. We have something that is called tipping, which is donations, live donations. Many streaming platforms allow attendees, the public, to donate or maybe tip the artist in that moment, which represents which accounts for quite a substantial amount of money, on top of all the new monetization ways that could happen related to something that we will talk about later on, which is concerts in video games. There are new ways in which artists and the audience can connect and interact with each other. Monica was talking about not so much an artist-public relationship, but a creator and a co-creator relationship. Because maybe fans, on top of following the artist, could be co-creators of the artist. They could write reviews of a concert. So the kind of links that are established today are much more interactive. We'll also have new challenges in terms of show productions from a technical standpoint, as live streams need to have a good sound quality, and so they need to be this idea of good quality of sound has to be thought of in advance. And from a creative standpoint, I think that the days of home shows are gone, and maybe taking a look into the future, the public will want live streamings to be much more creative. We have new synergies also with other creative industries, such to be the case of the video game industry and the audiovisual industry. There are also new stakeholders related to the legal aspects. We need to work on contracts, agreements. We need to analyze if in this 360 agreement era, artists don't require a clearance from maybe how they're going to fixate this. They may need get clearance from the labels, the record label. So you see that it's quite simple to understand how a live streaming works, because once it is over, it's gone. But when you are talking about maybe the show being uploaded for a longer time, now we're talking about some other rights. So on top of the rights that we've already talked about, we will need authors now and songwriters and artists and producers to authorize the fact that that content is fixed online. And it may also involve a synchronization license. Many times when you record something, you fix the sound, you get the image right, and of course the exploitation and the use later on of that live stream, it will require to harmonize and synchronize the rights of all the parties, because probably that's going to be posted on YouTube or will be made available on another platform, and therefore it will be necessary for those rights to be really well defined, who is going to get what and who owns each right and the outcome of an audiovisual recording. Also, we have new challenges for management entities that need to be a meeting point between right holders and those that want to use those rights for these new modalities. There are also new challenges related to the multi-territorial nature of this, which is related to copyright as a whole, and that also applies to these issues. And also we have challenges related to other rights, such as, for example, image rights, trademarks, brands, and applicable regulations to the digital world. For example, personal data. Imagine how much information you can get depending on what song is liked best by a certain group, and so on. And this is a great asset, and we need to take it into account.
Lastly, and to finish, I wanted to briefly mention concerts and shows in the digital world and in gaming. I really liked this phrase that games are the new venues of tomorrow, and it's really being true so far. The figures that are being reported in video game concerts are amazing. And here, for example, behind the slide, you can see a Travis Scott concert, who is a rapper from the United States. And with one presentation in fortnight of his concert, Astronomical, he got $40 million. There were 12 million players at the time when he played, which was just 10 minutes, a 10-minute concert. And to compare those 40 million in the physical world last year, in 56 dates, like physical dates, he had got 56 million. And here in 10 minutes, he got $40 million. So the synergies and the possibilities that are presented in the gaming world and the music world are amazing. Thank you very much. And I'm available, of course, for any questions or clarifications. Thank you, Federico, for your presentation. It was very clear, and it's really a big challenge, what you say. We're going to have Augusto now. Augusto Perera is a lawyer, member of the School of Lawyers of Florida. He is solely dedicated to intellectual property issues. He is in the Southern District of the United States, and he also works for the Federal Circuit. He studied in the University of Havana and a University of the United States, and he has worked with both legal systems in terms of copyright and in terms of the rights of authors. And his view is very interesting. He's going to tell us about the challenge of the collective management societies. Thank you very much, Soledad, and thank you very much, Federico and Monica, for being with us. And it's been a pleasure to share this panel. I'm going to continue with my presentation. We're going to briefly discuss these managing societies in the United States, these associations, and for you to see how to handle each of them. It's always important to determine the type of royalty, and the most important royalties are the execution ones, so the ones that are transmitted in the radio, restaurants, bars, whether it's streaming or Apple Music, Spotify. It can also be the reproduction of music, the playing music in jukeboxes and at the gym, etc. So each time music is played that way, there is a royalty that has to be paid. We're going to see who collects that royalty and how it's distributed. There's also the mechanical royalties that are for the physical distribution of music, for example, when they sell CDs, which we know that they don't sell a lot now. And also when there is a download, that you buy it and you download it to your computer or your phone. Or when there is a streaming or an interactive streaming. This also comprehends feastones and everything like that. And also the synchronization royalties, which is when music is also has movement or image, whether it's YouTube, TikTok. There is a type of license and a type of royalty that is generated, that generates income for the authors. In the United States, we're talking about that there's the PROs, which are responsible for collecting those royalties that we discussed before, those playing royalties. The biggest one are BMI, CZEC, and ASCAP. And BMI and ASCAP are companies that are non-profit. Then Global Music Rights isn't. CCLI is related to religious music, and ASCAP works a lot with authors and composers. You have to register there. You have to register with one of them as an author or composer, and they're the ones that handle among themselves the collecting those licenses. They do not collect the mechanical ones. It's only when the music is played at bars as ringtones and the streaming. We're also going to talk about the fundamental ones. BMI was founded in 1939, and it has a very big member base that is in the United States. It's the author doesn't necessarily have to be physically in the United States, though. ASCAP was also founded in 1914. It has more than 1 million members. And CISDAC, which was founded in 1930, doesn't have as many members as ASCAP and BMI, which are the biggest ones. I would say that globally, in the United States, they have most of the members. And when you register with BMI, you don't have to register with ASCAP. And they're the ones that each time the music is played in those media that we explain, the royalties for playing the music, they are the ones that collect that money, and it's distributed according to the law. There are other societies, other associations called interpretation ones, and they are specialized. And for example, the Christian Copyright International is a private one. Then we have other ones that are also private companies, and they have been created recently based on the internet and playing digital music. We also have what is called Mechanical Rights Organization, MROs, and they are associations which administer mechanical licenses and the royalties that are obtained when the music is sold in physical formats such as CDs, vinyls, or cassettes. And in many occasions, when it's also played through interactive services such as Apple Music, Slack, or Pandora. So the difference with ASCA and BMI is that they only get the royalties for performance. They also collect the royalties for the mechanical ones. The most famous one is Harry Fox. That's the one in the United States. And Harry Fox was founded in 1927. They have 50,000 editorials and a lot of many labels. And many of the digital providers are part of that. Then we have Music Reports and help SoundTrust collect royalties. SoundTrust is dedicated to collecting and connecting with all of these societies on a global level to help the members to connect. Because, for example, when you register with ASCAP or BMI, they collect the rights just in the United States, even though they may have some relations with other associations, managing associations in other countries. In Latin America, for example, or in other places. SoundTrust, for example, helps if you register with them. They help you go country by country because they have relations with other associations in other countries. So when the music is played outside the United States, they can help you collect that royalty as well, those royalties. The Mechanical License Collective, MLC, was created in 2019 because of the change in copyright of the law in 2018 in the United States, so the MLC started to collect royalties and to do that in January of this year. And they are dedicated to collecting those royalties, those mechanical royalties. And it's try to legislate and to try to concentrate on just one player, one stakeholder, that way that is really distributed in the music world. Sometimes you have one stakeholder that matches another one, they end up doing all the work. Then we have Sound Exchange, that was founded in 2003 and helps with the collection and distribution of royalties, of digital interpretation royalties. It has more than 45,000 artists and owns a lot of rights. We also want to talk about the problems that have arisen with the streaming part. The most important thing that we have to determine, that Monica was talking about at first, is that the author has the obligation of registering, whether in their country, and they do it with an association in the country. In the United States, these managing associations are divided in collective ones like Harry Fox, and also the PROs. They are separated. But in many countries, it's a collective one, and it's an obligation of the authors to register with them so that they can have that representation and they can collect those royalties. Many times that is lost, and the question is always, why is my music being played and I don't get any money? And the answer is, have you registered? It's not just registering. This week, I am registering a CD of an author, and we spent a week looking for the correct information, because registering and putting the name of the song is part of the job, but you also have to provide enough information to the managing association so that they can, when that music is played, they can determine that that music is associated with its author and that they have the right to collect those royalties. Regarding streaming, I think that the associations have advanced slowly towards creating licenses that allow for that. The pandemic has really accelerated that process in a way that nobody could foresee. We are talking about that from one day to another, we had been handling concerts, live concerts in a way for hundreds of years, and now that disappeared. And associations and creators both have had to adapt to that process. ASCAP and BMI, for example, have adapted, and there is an issue with negotiation, but it's not a very big one. It's not a matter of cost either. The thing is that we are trying to negotiate with ASCAP and BMI. The world is now global, whether we like it or not. And someone who wants to stream from their home in California can give direct access to anyone in the world who wants to pay and access from their computer to that. And the question is, when you negotiate with those associations like ASCA and BMI, the license is for the United States, and they say that this only covers the United States, and you will have to limit access, the access that you offer your users and the audience, unless you want to negotiate with, you want to deal with associations from other countries to get those types of license. There is specific music, such as Christian music, which has very limited licenses. Now, for example, with the pandemic that the churches have closed, this has forced them to open up a bit more to this new reality. And I think that even when we go back to normal a bit, when we can get together again and have concerts, some way or another, these streamings are going to continue. I think that's the way that we're going to continue in the future, and that we're going to be able to access live concerts. Also, all these digital platforms have allowed authors to take their music to an audience that before was very difficult to take it to, due to the cost that it implied and that it required, and the investment that it required to create that CD and to take that music to that people.
This client that we are representing, an author that began to sing the songs that she wrote with a friend. She went to see Davy. She got a lot of money. She had her CD recreated, and she got her music on all the digital platforms. So 5 years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, I would have said that that was a much more, that was a bit of a hurdle, and it was much more difficult to get there if you were just new in the music industry. But if you have a label as backup, or you're well-known, or you have a team that was actually, it wasn't so tough. But now we're talking about small authors that want to make their music available to the public, and these digital platforms have provided them with that opportunity. So not everything is looking grim. I think that we've had some inconveniences that we still need to overcome, but I believe that in the long term, these are changes that have come to stay. Thank you very much. And of course, I'm more than open to answering any questions that you have. Thank you, Augusto. That was very clear. We have a number of questions from our audience. I'd like to start with Federico, which is related to the sales of catalogs. In the middle of the pandemic, we were listening to catalogs that were sold out, such as Shakira, Bob Dylan, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and we were wondering why this boom in catalogs. And I'd like our panelists to talk about this. Is it a result of the crisis? How does digitalization affect the value of a piece? And I know that in some cases of catalog sales, we saw that maybe the used moral use was reserved, or maybe at least not using some songs or some pieces in political campaigns. How does that impact? What is the impact of the pandemic on this, and especially regarding value? I'd like to answer that question. That's a very interesting topic. And the answer as to what's going to happen is quite hard to have. We have, on the one hand, a reality, which is that in the financial world, investment funds are becoming more and more interested in catalog sales. There are some specific funds, such as Hypnosis, which specializes in the music industry, that has purchased a number of catalogs, and also some majors. The majors like Sony or Universal have done the same thing. And from the buyer's point of view, there is this idea that the asset of copyright of a musical piece is very safe as compared to some more volatile assets, such as, for example, the price of oil. And that is why some people are investing in music and not in other areas. And secondly, I believe that digitalization allows us, first of all, to have a better control in terms of what is the yield of those assets. And secondly, from the buyer's point of view, we have some possibilities that we cannot fully grasp today, but initially, at least, all the financial statistics in the music industry show as being very, very bullish. So I believe that the pandemic is playing a key role. That is certain in the case of some older catalogs and the sales, such as, for example, Bob Dylan, well, maybe we're talking about a long-term planning of their patrimony, and should be easier to manage. And also, we need to assess what happens, for example, with a song that is really successful today. And we need to think of whether or not that's going to remain successful in 20 years' time. Maybe an author says, a singer says, this is the song of the moment, and the time to make it a transaction is now. Maybe, anticipating that the value of that asset and those copyrights could fall in the long run. Also, there is this reality which is related to what's going to happen in the future related to these sales. In my opinion, I believe that it's going to behave like what I've described. I understand that there is some really interesting legal work in due diligence of catalog sales. We really need to know what are the masters, what masters are available, and to make a composition in terms of what are the rights, what are the exploitation possibilities, and who are the people with which you need to share those rights, and if that is something that is established, etc. Yes, and I think that the possibility of seeing how many clicks you got and how long people are listening to what you're singing also means that, well, it gives you a lot of appraisal tools that are more reliable, doesn't it? What Monica was saying, what Augusto was saying, these schemes in which we had a lot of arrows and different stakeholders and people in the industry that we know and how they connect with each other. Can we think of musicians self-managing their own pieces? Could these online digital platforms enable musicians to get a bigger cut? Or should it also be shared with all the different stakeholders that you mentioned before? Well, I could answer that question and give you some insights. I believe that some of these stakeholders are necessary, especially because we are facing, as we saw, the case of an industry that is extremely complex because it combines a number of rights, a number of users, and consequently, it's not always easy for an author to directly manage this. But we could reflect and say, okay, to what extent can we make that paperwork easier, and can we work with the creators in terms of giving them information on basic concepts so that they can directly manage their work? Because I believe that, especially in the digital world, there are more and more middle people that mean that the author, who is the person that creates all of this, gets a very, very small royalty of their work, which is nothing new, right? In negotiations between authors and labels, well, labels have always had the upper hand. So I believe that there are a number of reasons that make this complex, and all the technical complexities and the technical knowledge that you need to manage this. But I do believe that maybe some could be done. At Hemisferio Derecho, we work a lot with the creators in trying to teach them to do the basic stuff. That means our office provides, of course, sometimes musicians don't know how to do any of this, but we teach them how to register their work, which is the minimum thing that an author should be able to do, understanding that for them the relevant part is to create. And some of them will tell you, well, I don't want to focus on this because I want to fully dedicate to creating and doing the creative work, which is what makes them happy. But I think it's all about finding the balance between the capacity of self-managing and also leaving it up to the stakeholders that will do better in management, and consequently also should get a a cut, like Soledad said, do their work. I think what Monica's saying is important, and this is that even considering that all these technologies have provided a better access to the creation, we're always facing the dichotomy of the author that just wants to create, that just wants to focus on their work, and also that other part of business. When you have an author that starts but doesn't have the right team to back them up in order to make their business and their work grow, they need to do both things, right? They need to work creatively, also focus on the creation, but also do the business part. And this is something that we always try to inculcate, to educate our clients so that they protect their work, they register their work, because otherwise they will get frustrated, because otherwise they will not see results, and they will lose interest in creativity. Sorry, Soledad, we can't hear you. Now? Great. Augusto, we have this question that is very specific, and I believe it's related to your presentation. If, as a co-creator, should I also register in ASCAP or CESAC? Sorry, the answer is no. You just register with a single managing association, and they will collect interpretation royalties. ASCAP or BMI, for example, have also to register you with a mechanical managing association. So, for example, if you register with BMI, you will also be registered with the AMLC. And if you're registered with SGAE, then they work together with BMI and NASCAP, and so they will mutually help each other in terms of royalty collection. But of course, these are all private entities. There is an interest that they have in having more members and collecting more, because that's where they make the bigger cut. Okay, but if I'm a foreign creator, I'm a foreign composer, and I'm registered in SAREG, do I also need to register in NASCAP or BMI? Well, not necessarily, because the SGAE has agreements with NASCAP and BMI, so that they work regionally with each of the representatives of the songwriters. So they share royalties. If you're protected, oftentimes what will happen is that the bigger the managing association is, for example, SOCABI in Canada or in Europe, they will have these agreements with each other that will allow them to exchange royalties without the author having to register their work in each of them. SoundTrust is a company that will help you to register, for example, with them. They will charge you additionally to that, but SoundTrust precisely helps you in that process of making it abroad, of going international. And how do you see the relationship between the collective association and the boom and the streaming phenomenon? Have they towed the line? Have they created new licenses? Are they new fees? New reluctant at the beginning, I should say, but we've adapted, and now we do have a number of licenses that are available in the US. And I'm talking about, for example, when you're streaming a concert on your own platform. If you're streaming on YouTube, on Vimeo, etc., then they will have agreements with NASCAP and BMI, so you will not need a new separate license. But this client that we are representing now, which is a global company here in Miami, they started streaming concerts for their staff and their clients privately. There was, for example, a Latin American artist. They went to the studio, and we needed to negotiate with ASCAP, with BMI, with CSAC, because if an author is registered with NASCAP but not with BMI, because they just can't, then you need to get licenses from each of them. I mean, you as a user, right? As the local user that is going to create to make the concert possible. You need to get a license with each of them, but this is only going to give you coverage in the US. So if you want to get global scope and you want to have a client with a limited international access, then you need to start thinking about each country and all the access points. Yes, of course, the territorial nature of licenses, right? Which takes me back, Monica, to this phonogram producers. Back in the day when a producer discovered someone and they recorded with a label, and so the producer took them to different places and got them the chance to be streamed. That was different, but nowadays it seems that producers have it easier nowadays, don't they? We have platforms that basically have artists that collect clicks and followers, and basically when the work is almost done, you get the phonographic producer to say, okay, let's sign a contract. And you say, but wait, I already have like 2 full albums produced and I don't have a phonographic producer. So what is the role of producers nowadays? How do they need to reinvent themselves to make it work for them?
I think that it's already happening with the existence of these labels, these independent labels that have another type of relationship with the artists. When you evaluate a traditional contract, a traditional agreement with a label or with a big label, the conditions are, of course, much better for the label. And it's not that this is senseless to me. I think that at the time it worked, and there were conditions in which the artist, this exclusive artist, had royalties, a small percentage with a lot of restrictions and prohibitions. But this, regarding, for example, independent labels, it's been a very interesting move because we have supported them in this creation of new contracts for these new labels. And there is a different relationship there because the label recognizes not only that potential of the artist, but also that they want that recognition to happen and to be translated in terms of royalties, participation, and benefits. So it becomes a more collaborative contract in which the label puts something, the artist puts something in, and that collective efforts create new realities in the industry without still taking into account that there are other types of contracts and there are still artists that sign with these big labels. But this independent label thing is something that I think has a new outlook and a new perspective on the recognition of artists and the value of their work and that eventual royalty. I also think that apart from that, added to that, there is a very interesting move of artists who are trying to have their own labels, their own collective labels, and they already know. I don't know. I think that nowadays younger people have a lot of abilities, many different types of abilities at the same time. So they know how to do the digital marketing. They know what happens on the internet perfectly. And I think that facilitates other types of models regarding management, not just on the products, but also in that sense. In Argentina, they have a screen quota. So a quota for independent musicians. So there is a percentage, a determined percentage for that. As you can imagine, in the pandemic, national artists started to say, we need this 15% to be national music. So do you have in your legislations some kind of boost for that for independent musicians? In Colombia, in particular, there isn't really a law on quotas on the radio. There have been some interesting initiatives from musicians collectives that have promoted this type of thing, based particularly on the Argentinian model, but there haven't been any kinds of movements in this sense, like in the law sense. In terms of public shows, there is a measure related to the obligation of the person opening a concert, for an international artist, has to be a local artist. So that is something that appears and therefore there has to be a payment to that local artist, but it's only for shows and concerts. In the United States, there is no such proposal. Here the market is what determines it. A question and in Uruguay, Federico? Thank you, Soledad. No, in Uruguay, this type of quota is not foreseen, and we don't have them for other types of rights, and at least to start. It's a controversial topic, the reach that the juridical reach that could be foreseen, and to see if it's not a restriction to the freedom of commerce, depending on how it's foreseen. It's a modality that, of course, can provide a lot of benefits for the artists. It's not something that nowadays is being discussed in Uruguay. A question from Juan Felipe Porta. Augusto, how do inclusion licenses work, the synchronization ones that TikTok and Instagram and other platforms of the like use? Is there a special type of license in the United States? Well, the licenses that exist for those platforms are special ones, but they are negotiable. Those platforms negotiate with the PROs, with ASCA BMI. And when people put music on YouTube and those platforms, there is a system behind that is implemented, and they charge money for a certain amount of streams. For example, on YouTube, the payment is 0.0074 cents per streaming. There are regulations that establish that platforms don't have to pay unless there is a certain amount of streams per year or a number of months. For example, 900,000 is the average for each song, for each author, etc. So when you deal with those platforms, you don't need a specific license, but those platforms, well, we are in a period in which we are already sowing what was sowed before, and those when those platforms started, when people did whatever they wanted and nobody paid anyone. But now that's no longer the case. But it's private contracts between the platforms and the managing associations. We have still some time for one last question. Our friend Karina Carmona that is asking, what's the criteria that we should take into account to choose collective association as collective association in the United States, a management one? So I think that when we go to the bigger ones like BMI and ASCAP, they have a really big bargaining power. BMI and ASCAP are associations, non-profit associations. That's another element that we have to analyze. But the smaller ones are not necessarily less powerful. They have been created by composers themselves and authors themselves sometimes. So they have a more personalized service. I think that the most important thing is to analyze whether the association that you're going to affiliate to, well, what are the relationships that they have in the world? So is it going to be, maybe music is going to go up on Apple Music and it's going to have a global reach, and we have to determine if it's registered with ASCAP and BMI, what's going to be the reach of that. Of course, when we're talking with Apple, YouTube, Spotify, they already have contracts with ASCAP and BMI that are already established with payments and fees that you don't have to worry about. But so we have platforms like CD Davy where you pay and they put all the CDs, all the songs in the digital platforms. But I think that the most important thing is the reach that the association has, the managing association has. Maybe it's not a matter of what the bigger one is or the smallest one is. It's more about their interest in promoting artists and what the relationship is with the users and what's going to happen with the digital platforms. We are going towards a digital world, a global world, and we have to live with that. Well, I want to really thank you all, Monica, Federico, Augusto, Asipi, for choosing this topic of the music industry, people who were behind this matter, such as Jose Roberto Herrera, the people of the Committee of Copyright, Fabricio, Monica, and especially our panelists who really gave it all with these presentations for us to understand a bit more about the industry, the music industry, which is quite complex. So thank you very much, STP. Thank you all. See you soon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.